Welcome, everybody, to the Even Your Dynasty show. We are back with another Friday live show. We've got Dan and Ricky here. Welcome, guys.
What's up, boys? Long time no talk.
Yeah.
All right.
It's not like I
Couple, 2
talk to you
days.
guys all day, every day, or anything.
Not at all. It
Nope.
never happens. Oh, man. Well, we've got quite a few things to talk about today. I mean, actually, it's really going to be kind of like two major topics. We are going to touch on the Verlander signing again for the full kind of breakdown of our thoughts, or at least Dan and I's thoughts. You can check out the live show that we recorded. What was that, Tuesday night?
Yeah.
And but I do want to let Ricky kind of talk about it because he wasn't able to join us that night, so he's gonna kind of share his thoughts as well. Then after that, we'll jump into the Randy Winn interview that he had with, I think it was Baggerly on The Athletic, where he didn't, really name too many people specifically, but he did, share a lot as far as his, thoughts on development and a little bit of his philosophy. So we'll get into that as well. And then lastly, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about Luis Matos. And, is he kind of, we all thought he was going to be breaking out last season. Is he going to do it this season? It kind of feels like he's just been on the verge. And, we'll see if he can kind of get over that hump this season. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Just tweaking this. So yeah, we'll start off with the Verlander talk a little bit. I'm just gonna kick it straight to Ricky. I know we kind of shared our thoughts. Dan and I'm sure we'll jump in and touch on a little bit, but as everybody's aware by now, Verlander signed a 1-year, $15 million deal on I think it got announced Tuesday afternoon. So we'll get Ricky's thoughts on that. What do you think, man?
Yeah, so he's somebody we kind of mentioned in past shows that we could see the Giants going out and getting on a short-term deal as more of like a plan B or C after Burns went over to Arizona. He's somebody, at first not necessarily who I wanted for the Giants, but objectively he has been overall a very good pitcher, still even into his 40s. I think last year there was a lot made of, him being hurt for most of the year and his ERA being blown up a little bit. And it really doesn't tell the full story with him. While you do see that there's been a steady decline in strikeout rate for Verlander as he's gotten older, you still see a lot of overall really good numbers from him. And just as recent as 2023, his overall numbers were pretty good, even including his ERA. He was around 160 plus innings pitched, which would be great, for the Giants and what they've had in their rotation the last 2-3 seasons, even with Snell last year only hitting a little over 100 innings. So I think he's a welcome addition, a veteran presence that can go out and, teach the Birdsongs, the Harrisons, the Wisenhunts eventually, Roop, all these guys how to become a starter at the big league level. Something I think that we really haven't seen out of the young pitchers yet so far. You see guys that have, 2 solid pitches, and then it seems like their third and fourth pitches aren't really fully developed yet at this level. And we see a lot of these young guys just really don't seem fully ready to pitch a full season at the big league level. They're all kind of stuck around that 100 to 120 inning mark, and it's really something we need to see stepped up. So I think bringing in a veteran presence like Verlander, a guy that established, I think he can kind of take 3 or 4 of these younger guys under his wing and really show them how to be a pro at this level. So I do like the signing. I do think he can bounce back and have a little bit better year than he had last year. And despite what, a lot of people felt about this move, I do think he is still a pretty solid pitcher that can plug in and say like the number 3 spot in the rotation and really help this team out this year.
Yeah. The one thing I do, it's kind of 2 things that he still did last year well that I think will translate well to this park. Doesn't walk a lot of guys, and he doesn't give up a ton of hard hits. Like, he limits the hard contact. So You put that in Oracle Park for, half-ish of his starts, and I think that's a good recipe. So I think he has a chance to be pretty successful there. If you go back even just like 1 year, obviously his pretty much everything was a lot better. And then he won a Cy Young in 2022 at age 39. So, I mean, he's not far off from having been successful. I know last year he dealt with shoulder and neck injuries. Who knows if that'll be good or not this season, but there's some reasons to believe that he can have a bit of success this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think more than anything, it's just raising the floor of that rotation. I think that's something we've all really been concerned with ever since the Burns miss and him going to a division rival. I really do think this just takes a ton of pressure off of the two guys that are going to be plugging into the 4 and 5 spots. I do think we all generally believe that Robbie Ray can bounce back this year with a full spring training in him, and give this team say 150 to 170 innings, and that's reasonable, and get pretty solid production out of him. But you still have those question marks because you didn't really get the real Robbie Ray last year, as he was still kind of trying to find his command when they did bring him off of his rehab last year. So I do think this can help out a lot, and as long as he stays healthy, that's my biggest thing with Verlander. I think this helps out a ton, and at least even if you get some quality innings from him in the first half, and then you can more slowly bring along guys like Wisenhunt and Roop, if you do plug them into the rotation, depending on what happens with Hicks, of course, it'll make a big difference for those guys.
Yeah, for sure. And he's Verlander, I think one thing that's kind of, we talk about how much he can help the young guys. He's actually a really similar pitcher to Birdsong, just stylistically, hard fastball,
Mhm.
at least, I mean, his fastball's living around 93 nowadays, 93, 94, but, hard fastball, 12-6 curveball. Obviously Verlander stuff was a little bit better overall, but, similar styles to when he was younger. So, maybe he can teach Birdsong in particular a few things on attacking guys. And it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, this is another guy with that, veteran leadership type presence that you can have in the clubhouse too, that I still feel very strongly that this team has lacked since 2021, ultimately, when Buster finished up his career. I don't think you've really had a ton of that. You had guys like Crawford and Bell, but those guys were a lot more quiet in the way they conducted themselves for the most part. Now you have guys like Verlander and Adames who are a little bit more outspoken. And I think those guys know winning baseball, and ultimately these young guys really need that. They really need to learn how this team can get back to winning baseball and really find their identity in this park as, more of a pitching and defense type team. So,
yeah, I will say, compared to last year's accusations of Nick Ahmed and Dalton Jeffries, we've got quite the upgrade this year, boys.
I mean, objectively, this team right now is way better than the team that we had in the first half last season, in my opinion.
Oh,
and that team just hung around. The Giants as a whole last season never got below 6 games under 500, and they never got above 3 games over 500. Like, they just hung around. It seemed like 500 all season. So, you look at that team in the first half, which they dropped to 6 games under pretty early, but they went on a little bit of a run, and you just look at what they had. And they didn't have Lee for most of the first half. Snell was a net negative in the first half because he had only made a few starts, and he was really bad in those few starts. It took till, second half Snell to be what he was. Conforto had that really hot start, but then he got injured, and then he came back and was not good. After that injury, he went through one of the craziest slumps of the year that would have been probably the worst slump of the year had Bailey not gone 3 for the month of August. And they had Nick Ahmed starting games at shortstop. Like they had, and Tyro was pretty bad for most of the year. So they've upgraded quite a few positions from last year to this year. Now you have Ramos out there. You've got Lee out there, hopefully. Now with the Verlander signing, hopefully he's giving you stuff. Like I could easily see this team being at or a little bit above 500 in the first half. And, we'll just kind of see from there. I mean, hopefully they exceed expectations. I don't have super high expectations for them. I still think they're an 82, 83 win team in all reality. Maybe they grind out 84. I think they are a big bat away from really at least being in the conversation for the third wild card. But I look at this Verlander signing and I kind of see it going one of three ways. Like either he's good and the team is good, in which case awesome, and he's going to help contribute. Either he's good and the team's bad, in which case awesome, you just trade him. He's on a 1-year deal. Send him back to Houston or something. Let them use him for a run. Or he's bad / injured and he's out of the rotation anyway, halfway through the year. So
yeah, but to that point, that last point, I told you guys this when the signing happened, and it's something I feel like a lot of fans aren't realizing. The starting pitching depth in the first half of last year was abysmal. Like there was a point in time, like we talked about, we had 2 starters. And the other days we're rolling out bullpen games after bullpen games after bullpen games, in which we kept saying like these guys are going to get drained pretty quickly. And you started to see some of that fatigue. So I think it's, a lot of fans are like, well, what do we need Verlander for? We've got Ray and we've got Harrison, we got Birdsong and Hicks and whatnot. And it's like having another arm on a team that could barely put 2 starters out on the field for a solid month and a half is a good thing. So that's one of the big takeaways that I have.
Yeah. I'm going to use it. It's funny because of what he put together for rosters, but I'm going to use a Zaidi quote that was actually very accurate. At one point, he said, you pretty much need like 8 starters in today's game because of injuries, attrition, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have to give guys breaks, everything. You need like 8 starters. Now, he never backed up what he said. He always had like 3 at best. But, that is something that he had said at one point where it was like, you need 8 starters in today's game. And he's right. Like, you need a bunch of starters. And I love what the Giants have for depth down in AAA, where they're going to have, Mason Black is probably going to be down there. Tristan Beck is probably going to be in some kind of bulk role. Keaton Winn in a pinch, you could probably throw out there for 4 innings or 5 innings. Wisenhunt will be in AAA. Roop is going to probably be in a bulk role as well. Like, they have a lot of guys that in a pinch could make a start. Some of those guys will be in the pen and, they're not going to be the most built up, but they have a ton of guys right now that are at least up at either on the 40-man or close that can, make a start if they need it, or a few.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it also comes down to knowing what you're saying when you're saying those things. Like if you're talking about having 8 guys that can start games for you, going in and giving us 3 innings at best or 4 innings at best in a pinch, that is not having 8 guys. You need guys that when everything is going right can give you 7 quality innings if everything is absolutely perfect. That should be the standard. But obviously you should be able to expect five quality innings from a guy. Even if it's 5 innings, 3 runs, keep you in a ball game, you should be able to expect that from 8 guys. You cannot go out there and only be rolling out guys for 3 innings a start like they were doing. And that was always the problem. And we'll get into it a little bit later with some of Wynn's comments, but it really comes down to, developing these guys when they first get drafted and not, handling them with kid gloves. And really the second they're getting out of college ball or even high school ball, pick up where they left off, wherever they last were playing at, and continue to build them up innings wise and pitch wise and really develop them while you have that time. Otherwise, you're just simply wasting 2 to 4 years of development, and then they're not ready for another, 1 to 2 years at least at the big league level. And then you set yourself back to the point where you are pigeonholing yourself into getting a Burns because you have this big void in your rotation. You have all these, you know, young top prospects that are starting pitchers, but none of them are ready to go when they're supposed to be ready to go because you never really fully put it on them and expanded their workload. I mean, ultimately the Giants got that whole system from the Dodgers and trying to baby these guys. And then look at the Dodgers. They're the most notoriously hurt pitching staff in the league. It always cracks me up with them how everybody says how they're the best at developing pitching. Sure, you go and, you know, have all these young arms go and develop another secondary pitch and they're using it at a high level, but what happens when they blow out their UCL, you know, within their first 2 seasons of you know, Major League Baseball? It's crazy. You can't do that to guys. You can't have their workload be within 3 to 4 innings and 70 pitches, and then you expect them to be able to handle a 162 game season where they're throwing 150 to 170 innings right off the bat and maxing out on velocity. It's super unreasonable.
Yeah.
So it's good to see a little bit of a difference in philosophy there.
Yeah. And I'm going to address this one because he said, why isn't anybody talking up Birdsong? I've heard like 3 podcast interviews that didn't mention Birdsong in the rotation. What happened? I don't know, like, honestly, why so many of the different shows are just assuming that Jordan Hicks is going to be in there. You know, maybe they are just going to honor it. I personally am of the opinion, and I know you guys kind of fall on the same side as me, where it, you know, if I'm Posey, I just look at Hicks and be like, bro, I'm not the one who told you I'd let you start. Like, you're going in the pen. We're doing what's best for the team. What's best for the team is that you're throwing 104 in the pen, not throwing 94 in the rotation, getting hit, can't throw strikes consistently, even when you're throwing 94. And you're getting, you know, you're way easier to hit. You can't go deep in games. You're getting gassed out by mid-May. Like, that's not what's beneficial to the team. Birdsong being in the rotation is beneficial to the team. But that said, you know, kind of like I mentioned on the show I did the other day and talking to you guys, is if you're not going to put Birdsong in the rotation, if you're going to have Hicks start in the rotation, put Birdsong in sack. Do not put him in the bullpen where he's throwing 30 pitches or 40 pitches and that's it. And then all of a sudden, you know, Hicks is going to get yanked in mid-May when he's gassed out, and we're going to shove him back in the rotation and go, okay, Hayden, now we want to see you throw 90 pitches. It's like, no, that doesn't work. Like, he needs to be on a starter's workload from start to finish next season. And I would say it should be in majors, but if they're hell-bent on, you know, Hicks getting the first shot, then stick him in sack to start at least the year. Although they could go 6-man rotation. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I'm not personally hugely fond of that. I think if you do go that route, you should at least let Webb pitch on normal rest and then kind of let the other guys, you know, they just get bumped back on whenever Webb's making his start. If he's jumping someone, they just get bumped back and get extra rest. That'd be my feelings on that.
Yeah. So couple things to your points there. One, I agree with this, Mike. Yeah. One, it is funny that Birdsong is brought up because Cody, I remember specifically, has been a huge Birdsong truther even since last offseason before he even got the call up. So the fact that, you know, nobody's talking to him, well, Cody was talking to him last year. So there's that. Two, to your point about that, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. He should be in the rotation no matter what. And Hicks should be in the pen. There's no discussion. Like, that really shouldn't be up for debate at that point. And lastly, regarding the 6-man rotation thing, it's like you said, and the 3 of us have discussed, the one that impacts the most is Webb. And I don't like the thought of that. I'd be open to it on that condition, as you described, that Webb has his normal days and the other 5 get kind of stretched out. That would be my only hesitant to it, because it'd probably be beneficial, for being real, for, Ray, Verlander, Birdsong, Harrison, etc. Especially since apparently with Harrison, a lot of his issues last year attributed to fatigue. So I think, stretching those guys out, Ray coming off, 2 years removed from Tommy John, Verlander being up there in age, Birdsong still being young. Like, it's not a bad idea to stretch those guys out. I really, really, really don't want to impact Webb in any way, shape, or form.
I'm not a huge fan of the 6-man rotation personally, because in my opinion, you got not only Webb, but I think with Ray and Verlander, you have guys that have built their whole routines for, 10 years of pro baseball on a schedule with a 5-day, or pitching every 5th day basically. And ultimately what that does is then they've got to, when the season comes, figure out kind of last second how they're going to change up their routines. What days are they, long tossing? What days are they throwing pens? What days are they lifting heavier? All these things get impacted. And I don't think guys this deep into their career are going to be super open-minded to the idea of that. Obviously, like Dan said, it definitely would help them stay healthier for sure. I've seen a lot of times in the past where veteran starting pitchers are just super against it because they're very routine oriented, especially starting pitchers. The bullpen guys, not so much, because they're so used to going on the fly and have to be ready at any point in time, even if they've thrown the, last 2 days. But those veteran starting pitchers, I don't see being super open-minded to that. So not a huge fan. Like Mike says, if you get Sasaki, then maybe you can work something out there. But I would just say leave those 3 guys alone, assuming that they aren't willing to do that, which I don't think they would be. But you kind of approach that issue when it comes up. If you actually do land Sasaki, obviously, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I did want to touch on, Cody just brought up, Mike S's other comment about if Hicks gets salty for being moved to the pen, you could trade him. Absolutely. This guy's making $11 million a year. So if he really wants to complain about getting moved to the pen when there's clearly a regime change that has happened since he signed that contract, tough, dude, figure it out. You either want to be here or you don't, ultimately. The guy, I believe the number was April 27th. After April 27th, he did not go past 5 innings pitched, not even 5 1/3 innings pitched.
I think May 8th.
It was May 8th.
Yeah, I looked it up.
So he got like another start or 2 in.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. So ultimately, if they really are dead set on him getting plugged back into the rotation and say like the 4 or 5 spot, I give him a month or 2, maybe to the end of May at most. And if he cannot consistently clear 5 innings and is constantly laboring in the 3rd after he gets one time through the lineup, he's done. You got to move on to somebody who gives you more upside there, because there's just zero upside in a guy that's capped out at 5 innings. Because we saw all of last year, it was, yes, he couldn't handle the workload, but it was also the way he pitches and his lack of command that's always been an issue with him, even in the bullpen, to where he just can't keep his pitch count down. And you got to learn how to be a starting pitcher at this level. Otherwise, you just get eaten alive, and that's pretty much what you get. You can't have that at this level. You gotta move on, and you got to get Birdsong and Harrison built up. They have to be a way bigger priority. You do have Hicks locked up for this year and 2 more seasons, but ultimately the guy is like 28, 29 years old. Prioritize Harrison and Birdsong and some of these other guys. You got these really young pitchers, and you really got to get them to the point in the next couple of years where you have multiple guys that can give you, 150, 160 plus innings.
Yeah. 100%. And really that Hicks contract, if another team, well, I mean, if he gets salty for moving the pen, I mean, another team would have to be trying to trade for him as a starter. But you look at what starters make right now, that 11 million is not much. So I don't think he'd have no. Like, I think he'd have a market. But even if you wanted to trade him, to a team that wanted to use him out of the pen if you just decided to trade him and it wasn't, because of him being a cancer or anything like that. He's $11 million for a setup man is kind of the going rate right now. You look around the league. So, I mean, his contract really is not much. Yeah, exactly.
Hoffman today was exactly 11 mil.
Perfect. And it's the same amount of years and everything. Like, he's got 3 years remaining. I think Hicks is younger. I don't know by how many years, but Hicks is younger. And yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have any issue moving him if you were actually motivated to move him. But it may depend on if Hicks is, the reason for moving him at the end of the day. But we're gonna jump on over to the Randy Winn talk. That was kind of the meat and potatoes of this video that we wanted to record today. And for those of you that didn't see, Randy Winn went on. He did the interview with Baggerly. It's on The Athletic if you want to read the entire thing. He doesn't really, name specific players in the system and give like thoughts on anyone in particular. It was more of a kind of a broad discussion of his beliefs for development and things like that. And there were a handful of things, there were some takeaways from that I had. I know these fellas did as well. And there were a few specific things that he said that I really liked, but kind of the overall gist was it feels like common sense is returning a little bit to development, which is really nice to hear. And you get a little bit of a background on, why his mindset is the way it is on certain things for development. And it was really interesting to read. And, I know we're not going to necessarily agree with 100% of what he says. There are some things with analytics and all that I know a lot of people are kind of freaking out about. The more analytically minded people that are in the Giants fan base don't like this guy, even though he's been on the job for like a month. It's like, give the guy a chance. But you can tell that he's accepting of those things. He just wants people developed a certain way, and he's not going to just ignore the analytics, which is a good sign.
Yeah, I think if you really read Randy's comments, he's not at all closed-minded to the idea of analytics. In fact, some specific comments he made was, he's not taking over Kyle Haynes' role as, director of player development and all of that. He's more working side by side with him and actually kind of letting Kyle Haynes oversee everything from the top. And Randy's trying to work more hands-on within the organization so he can really get a feel for who's doing what in their roles, and then seeing what's actually being taught at each level and making sure there's a consistent message throughout the system is the biggest thing. And in that, he talked about both teaching baseball fundamentally and growing guys and making sure they have high baseball IQ and know what's asked of them in specific situations based on their roles. And then also incorporating analytics, whether it's, certain things guys can do to their swings, or bringing in new equipment and machines to help, develop guys as well, whether it's certain pitching machines that can help a guy, hit a curveball better or hit a specific type of pitcher that they struggle with, or maybe there's a certain location that, has found a hole in their swing. It's incorporating all those things into one and making sure they're providing every tool necessary for players was his big emphasis. It's not, he even specifically mentioned, I don't want to be caught in the middle of the crowd that's, all about feel for the game versus analytics. He said, I don't want to be on either side. I just want to be right in the middle and incorporate both things. And he even said, I feel like for a while there, baseball swung in the analytics direction very heavy. And he feels like the pendulum is starting to swing back towards the middle where, yes, because of, modern day baseball, we are still going to incorporate analytics, but we're swinging back towards the middle a little bit where we are getting back to feel for the game and getting back to the fundamentals and, trying to develop smart baseball players.
Yeah, it's exactly what you just said. And that's something that I've been saying for months on this show. There's a difference between utilizing analytics and overusing / relying exclusively on analytics. And that's where, the root of the issue was as far as the prior regime for these last few years now. So that's one thing I've talked about, is finding that happy medium between the two and not leaning, one direction exclusively compared to the other and vice versa. So Randy's comments kind of emphasize that point. And it's like you said in the beginning, Cody, it's like common sense is being, reintroduced here, which is, a blessing. I'm thrilled.
Yeah. This quote right here this was one of my favorites in it. He has a couple that I really liked, a couple of his answers. But talking about how, it's not rocket science. Develop winning players, have them doing kind of what Ricky was just saying, having them do the fundamentals, having them do all the little things, understanding, what their job is out there and how to do all the things that they need to do to win games. Something that we have complained at nauseum, almost the last couple of years about the Giants not doing all the little things. Like they can't get a bunt down. They can't steal bags. They can't, move a runner from second to third by getting a ground ball to the second baseman or something. They can't hit a sac fly when they need it. There's just so many things they just did not do well. And he's like, listen, we're not just developing tools here. We're not trying to just, hey, this guy's going to have great power, or, we're going to work on this, that, or the other. Like, no, we're going to teach them how to play the game the right way. And then hopefully, as he mentioned, you're going to still hope that you can develop a superstar or two, but you want people that can contribute. The second they come to the major leagues, you want them to be ready to help you win games in some capacity. And that's something the Giants did really well back in, the early 2010s is all the guys they brought up, even if they weren't stars right away, they helped you win games. I think of a guy like Joe Panic, who, he hit like 300, but he was kind of, a slap hitter when he first came up. Never really actually grew out of that, but, he was a slap hitter, but he did all the little things because he was so contact oriented, and he didn't really have like a true weakness in his game other than that he just didn't have a lot of pop. He was really sound defensively, smart base runner, moved guys over. Like he just did all the little things well, and they didn't need a star. They just needed a really solid player.
Yeah, and expanding on that a little bit, he also mentioned, not only developing guys into smart pro players and having them learn the game and knowing what to expect from them in in-game situations, but he also mentioned them, just dominating each level, and then when they dominate, challenging them again before just automatically promoting them by telling them this is what you're still struggling with. We need to see you correct this before you get moved up and really earn that promotion. Give them a specific challenge, because ultimately when they get to the big league level, they're going to have to be able to fight through those challenges the same way. So it's making these guys more prepared when they actually do get promoted from AAA to the big leagues. And something I really liked that he said, and it's something I've really thought that they need to get back to, especially with their lineup, is the specific roles within each player, not having all these guys that are just going up, trying to have the same approach, trying to hit bombs, having to look for a specific pitch and letting a lot of good pitches go by. He wants guys that are going to come in and fill a certain role. If it's your second baseman and, his skill set is, like you said with Panic, he's more of a gap-to-gap guy, a line drive type hitter, and he's going to play really good defense. That's his role. So he's going to be expected to execute hit and runs, get a bunt down, or if it's a guy with a little bit extra speed, it's going to be stealing a base when you need it. It's knowing those specific roles. Everybody has a different thing that they need to execute within their position in the lineup, rather than having all these guys doing the same thing. And that's ultimately how you squeak out these 1 and 2 run games, by just that one situation in the 7th or 8th inning where you're down by 1 run and you do get a couple guys on base to start the inning. You need to be able to move that runner over. You need to be able to get him in, like you said, with a sac fly. So these guys knowing specifically what their role is going to be when they do make it to the big leagues is huge. So then that way, even if their offense isn't high powered, they know how to win games.
Yeah. This was the next one I really liked, where he's talking about, I mean, number one, having it, making it clear to your players, like if you earn the promotions, you're going to get the promotions. You're not being blocked by other players. So, having that good communication with them. But number two, I love what he's talking about, like attempting to steal 100 bags in the year. That was his instruction. And the idea behind that was, you're not going to get a good jump every time. You're not going to get, you're not going to succeed every time, but you're going to have an understanding of, by the time that's done, when you get to the majors and you work your way through the system, you're going to have an understanding of how to get good jumps, when you've gotten a good jump, when you haven't gotten a good jump and you need to hit the brakes and, drop anchor and get back. Like, just little things like that. Like, this is just a guy that understands what it takes for these guys to develop into winning players. So it's been kind of, this article really gives me a lot more confidence in him, and it might not work. Like, they still have to evaluate talent. They still got to get the right players. Like, there's a lot more than just having a good plan in place. So there is a lot more to it. And they are keeping Haynes around. I've liked their last couple drafts. I like the talent they're getting on the international market. So Salermo and them are doing a good job there. But this at least gives me confidence personally when I'm reading a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. I think this really is a role that's about communication more than anything for me. It's Randy kind of filling those gaps in between each level and really being more hands-on, because he even mentioned like Kyle Haynes in his role has so many other things with modern day baseball being, put on his plate when it comes to strength and conditioning and nutrition and all those things that we don't really hear a ton about, to where he's getting wrapped up in so many different things. And this way you have that one guy that's kind of just overseeing everything. It's almost like, if you think of it from, all the levels from the standpoint of, like, say you have, 4 grocery stores or your 4 levels in the minors, and Kyle Haynes is the one running all 4 of those stores, but he doesn't have the ability to go in and get hands-on and talk to each one of those managers. Think of those as the coaches. And then Randy Winn is that middle guy that goes in and communicates from Kyle and makes sure they're on the same page, and he's going down to each of those stores or these 4 levels and communicating the same message and knowing what's going on within these, 4 levels, and really making sure that, what he wants is what's actually being done at those levels. Because, it's a long season and each of these coaches are going to have their own mindsets, and that's fine. But you need to make sure that from an organizational standpoint, that these guys are communicating consistently what your guys' message is and how you guys want these players to be at the big league level as pros.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel like he's kind of a tip of the spear, like philosophical kind of guy? I mean, obviously Buster is like the actual, tip of the spear, but like,
of course,
it almost just feels like an extension of Buster, so to speak.
Yes.
Like, as far as the development side goes, as the farm goes, it's like he's just an extension of Buster. Like, this is our vision, and I'm going to support Kyle Haynes and the people down there to the best of my ability, but like, this is the direction we want this team going.
Yeah.
And then you guys do it.
Yeah, agreed 100%. And I do think it's something that they really desperately needed, and it kind of goes into, the conversation of what they've been doing the last 6 years with starting pitching specifically, and how they've been trying to develop their starting pitching in the minors. And Randy talked about that too. He had quotes where he discussed, these guys need to learn how to pitch at the big league level. They need to learn how to be pros. Ultimately, how are they going to be pros when they get to the big league level if they're only throwing, 3 innings or, 70 pitches each start? You got to learn how to be that guy before you get to the big league level. You can't have these guys learning all this 2-3 years after they're already at the big league level. They need to understand what it takes to get through a starting line, a hitting lineup 3 times. They need to learn what it's like to make adjustments. If you're ultimately pitching 3 innings and getting through a lineup 1 time in the minors, how are you ever going to learn those things and how to make adjustments and how to attack hitters in different ways? Whether it's going the first time through the lineup and you're only going, say fastball changeup, and then you start going the second and third time through the lineup, adding in, your breaking pitches, for example. You need to learn how to make these adjustments, and that's something that Farhan didn't put enough emphasis on with these pitchers in years past. You even saw it with the veteran guys that he brought in with like Alex Wood and Alex Cobb. So many times you saw these guys only giving you 5 innings because they were terrified as a team to let these guys get into the other team's lineup a third time because they were afraid of them knowing these pitchers because they're kind of one-trick ponies. And that's another thing Randy Winn mentioned. He mentioned these guys need to be able to throw more than 2 pitches. You cannot go up there throwing just 2 pitches. And who does that remind me of? Keaton Winn, 100%. Fastball splitter and nothing else to come at you. And what happened with Keaton Winn every time he came out? He'd usually look good early on, and then he'd start getting lit up because everybody knows it's a guessing game. I've got a 50% chance of guessing what's coming. If I get that fastball and jump on it, it's going to go a long ways.
Yeah. His talk about pretty much everything on the pitching side, I loved. And it's funny because it came from a guy that, obviously wasn't a pitcher, but just the understanding, because, he faced a lot of great pitchers in his career, and he kind of understands like how those guys are trying to get him out and other people out. And, it's just having that understanding of what it takes for those guys to be successful. And I mean, you could look at like any of these questions and he kind of hits the nail on the head. He talks about, how are you going to get used to going deeper into games without doing it? So you got to do it earlier, do it in the minor leagues. They ask, are they throwing enough innings? He goes, no, they're not throwing enough innings. People are still getting injured. The injuries haven't gone away. So clearly that's not really solving the issue, just limiting everyone's pitch count. So maybe not trying to go max effort 100% of the time, developing actually 3 pitches instead of 1 or 2, just like Ricky said. He's like, these guys have to be able to have a third pitch. Otherwise, you're developing a relief pitcher at that point.
Yep.
And you look at guys like Harrison, and it sucks because his potential is sky high, and a lot of people have given up on him. I haven't, because I think you can still develop it. And the fastball, even though the velocity was down, was still effective. The changeup, I think, showed enough that if he could just get like a dominant slider, like get some kind of sharper slider to go with the fastball, he'd at least have 3 pitches that he could feature at any time, even if he doesn't throw the changeup a ton. But and then you have Birdsong, who at least has 3 or 4 pitches that he could throw at any given time. So that's part of why I like Birdsong more than the others. But he talks about these in a lot of these comments. I believe there was one more talking about the pitchers, but I'm not sure. I might have missed it. But yeah, I mean, you look at how many innings a lot of these guys threw in the minors. He talked about Scherzer and Verlander and how they threw a lot in the minors. There was one that I actually pulled up, and somebody actually used it as a kind of a devil's advocate point in the comments on the last video, where it was like, well, look at Matt Cain. He burned himself out at 27, 28 years old because he threw so many innings. And I don't think anybody's encouraging the Giants to make a guy throw 200 innings at age 21. Like, I don't think any of us are saying, hey, just screw their arms, just let them throw forever all day. And that's not the case, but they need to be built up more than they are right now. And I'm going to pull up Cain's. This is actually one that I really liked from when he was in the minors. And I don't think, and I also have Madison Bumgarner. Bumgarner, I'm just going to read it off. He threw about 140 as a 19-year-old, and he threw 140 again as a 20-year-old before he was with the Giants full time in 2010. So Bumgarner threw a good amount. Kane, as a, what was he born? 84. Okay. So as a 19-year-old in his first full season, they had him throw 74 innings. As a 20-year-old, he threw 158. And then as a 21-year-old, he threw 145, but he also threw 45 innings or 46 innings, I think, in the majors that year. That was his first year in the majors. So he threw 190 innings as a 21-year-old. And then he threw, 200 plus for like the next 8 years. And that's probably why his arm kind of fell apart at the end. But, he was ready. The whole point is he was ready to throw a significant amount of innings from day one. So, and maybe we scale that back to where they're ready to throw 160, as Ricky has said. But, they need to go back to making these guys throw 130, 140 innings in the minors. This throwing 105, 110, 115, capping out at 120 innings after being in the minors for 3 years, I think it's asinine. You're not helping develop these guys.
And it's finding that happy medium. It's not all or nothing. It's not either have them max out and with their velo and not throw enough innings to really be a quality big league starter. And it's not have them go 200 innings every single year from the time they're, 22, 23 years old. There's that happy medium. It's like you said, it's have them pitch 130, 140 innings in the minors, get used to that workload, and then build them up to where when they're in the big leagues, you're getting 150, 160. Once they establish themselves a little bit more like Logan Webb has, then you can talk about going 200 innings. But it's all case by case and, monitoring these guys throughout the course of a season. If you see a guy showing clear signs of fatigue, cut his pitch count down a little bit, give him a little bit of break, or, if he has a little bit of tendonitis or something that he's battling, you go and IL him for, a couple starts and let him get fully recovered. And then you kind of just play it throughout the course of the season. It doesn't have to be, so, hit or miss as far as the innings go. You have to build these guys up, though. You can't just baby them and have them go, 90 to 100 innings for 3 years in the minors and then come up and then all of a sudden think that they're going to get through a full season. Because if they do get through a full season and they are pitching well, they are going to, add on another 50, 60, 70 innings without even making the playoffs to, their numbers from the prior season. You have to have a natural progression.
You got anything you want to add, Dan?
You guys are taking the words right out of my mouth, man. But no, you're not wrong though. It's like finding a happy medium and a fine balance is key in pretty much all the issues that we're facing right now, but especially this. So yeah, it's like you said, it's not about, trying to tell these guys they got to go 180, 190 plus, but you also don't want them to go out there and give you 2, 3, 4 innings on a regular basis. So it's all about finding that happy medium. And like you guys said with Randy Winn's comments in there, he basically says that he's like you said, he's not a pitcher, but he's like, how do you learn to steal? You actually go and do it. Like you build that up, attempt enough times, and you know how to steal. The same thing goes with pitching. How do you, work up that arm to be able to sustain that load? You build that up and get there. So yeah, that's key. And I'm glad Randy's in there. A lot of people didn't really like the hiring at the time, even though he's got experience, but I think just that interview in general says numbers about his mindset, his philosophy, how he and Buster are, like you said, they're two peas in a pod as far as their envision for the farm system and to try to build up the developments. So I'm all for it right now.
Yeah. Now there wasn't going to all be 100% that we liked. Obviously I think there was one thing that we all kind of disagreed with to an extent. And that is, he kind of mentioned, and I can't find the exact quote. I know it's in there, but he did mention that he's kind of the belief that players should spend like a full level or a full season at each level. I mean, and I do agree to an extent when him and Buster talk about like players should dominate the level and show they're good enough to move on. I don't necessarily agree that a lot of these guys are going to need to spend a full year at each level though. Like there are players that, especially you get them at like a high school player, if they're 19 in their first year, yeah, I don't really mind. You spend a year at each level and you're going to be 23-ish knocking on the door. That's pretty normal. But there are plenty of college players and players like Bryce Eldridge that are super advanced that you pull up and you realize this guy doesn't need to sit in A ball for a whole season. And then he gets triple A or he gets to high A and you go, yeah, this guy doesn't need to spend more than a couple months in high A. Like to me, you can aggressively advance a player until he shows that he's actually challenged. And then once he's challenged, unless there's like some fatal flaw that you're seeing, like this guy's got a massive hole against a curveball or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing something out there. Like, unless you see some kind of like fatal flaw where you're like, this guy needs to fix this like now before, whether it's mechanical or whatever, even if he's kind of dominating a level, like we need to fix this before he moves on, then fine. But, there are players that it's not necessary. Now, granted, that could be just kind of a general philosophy. We'll see it in practice this season. Hopefully we do get a couple good examples where guys are just absolutely dominating early in the year, and we'll see if they're aggressive moving them. But I think that was the only thing that I saw in the article where I was like, I don't necessarily agree wholeheartedly with that.
Yeah, I have the quote right here. He said, "The only way you get better is with reps. So yes, I would like to slow down the process of moving guys up. I would like guys to stay in place for a full season. I think that's how you learn. Seeing the same opposing teams over and over, seeing how they make adjustments to you and how you adjust back. When somebody is killing a league, that can be the best time to implement change. If a player is hitting 336 with a ton of home runs at low A San Jose, but we see something that's going to be a problem at the next level, then that's the time to put a little nugget at the back of his head. Because if you wait until they're at double A and they're hitting 196, anybody who's ever put on the uniform knows what it feels like when you're drowning and in a slump. You just try anything, is what he said.
And it's like, I understand his logic to an extent, but I don't think that should be generalized as like a base rule with every single player in your system. For the reasons that you described, it's like, it should be a case by case scenario. Like, yes, if you want to have that as a general overview for how you view your farm system, that's fine. I get it. You want them to get their reps in at each level, but it should also be case by case for instances such as Bryce. Like, Bryce was emphasized last year for his rise going from, low way all the way to Sacramento. And it's because he proved himself at each level that he's good enough to handle that competition and good enough to advance. And I think you should, look at it that way for each player. So if you want that as a general overview, just for the pure sake of emphasizing the need to get repetitions for your guys and experience at each level, that's fine. But there should be exceptions, in my opinion.
I think this is pretty accurate right here. A lot of teams are using the first couple of years in the majors as development. Like they rush them up there. We're seeing it with a guy like Harrison. Like they're really developing him at the major league level. And to an extent that's okay, but I think Harrison should have been at least built up to handle the workload. If you want to work on some of the pitches because you think you can get some people out, then fine. Like I don't really mind that. A guy like Luis Matos, could he and Casey Schmidt, could they use some work with their like plate discipline and pitch selection and all that? Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of ways that can contribute to the team in the meantime. Like I don't think they necessarily have to be in AAA for it, But yeah, it's tough. And then I really liked what Tom said here too. I think beyond play is a guy mature enough to advance. Yeah, I mean, so we'll see. Once the season's going and we see how these guys are doing, we'll get a better feel on if it's more of a general philosophy or if it's like, hey, this is how we want to treat every single player. And that's where I think, as you guys said, it's case by case. We just want to see what they do. When you have a college guy that's a recent draft pick and A-ball just destroying the league, if Jacob Christian or Jeremiah Jenkins or Xander Darby or any of these guys that were 3 or 4 year college starters go to San Jose next year and absolutely annihilate the league, are we going to really keep them there all year? That's, to me, that's the question. So,
yeah, I mean, the biggest issue for me is you significantly diminish upside with college players if you're going to be, pigeonholing these guys to 1 year for each individual level. It's like, ultimately, do we really think a high level, advanced college hitter needs a full season at low A San Jose? I mean, we've already talked to Charlie Zuccounti and we've talked to Jacob Christian, guys that came from college and are pretty experienced players. These aren't high school kids. And they said, down in San Jose, you're looking at a lot of guys who are more just throwers than they are pitchers and haven't really figured it out yet. You have a lot of these international guys and high school guys that are still trying to, figure out their game, find their command, develop secondary pitches. And then they both said when you get to Eugene at high A, even then it's a pretty big jump because you see that guys are so much more developed even just at that level. So it's like it has to be case by case depending on the player. I agree wholeheartedly that an advanced player that's dominating the league deserves the promotion, but I just don't think you can hold a guy back for half of a season to wait for those challenges to come, because you're also relying on these other teams' scouting departments to identify these holes, and they may never do it. And then the other thing too is in these lower levels, you get a ton of turnover of these rosters too. So while you are facing the same, 6, 7, 8 teams over and over and over, you might very well get a huge difference in, rosters at the beginning of the year versus what you get at the end of the year, because every team promotes players at a completely different pace. So to me, it's really got to be case by case. I do think at times the previous regime started, promoting players way too quick.
Agreed.
But there are guys that definitely do deserve it, and you need to reward those players to keep them motivated and see if they're guys that can help you, help contribute at the big league level a lot quicker.
Yeah, it's like Heath just said right here. Posey spent 1 year in the minors. Crawford, prime example, he came straight up from AA. There's these guys that have proven themselves in one aspect or another, and they get brought up and look, they become literal legends. So that's why it should be case by case. Just picture this. Just imagine Bryce going down to Richmond for this whole year, 2025 season, and then going to Sacramento whole year for the 2026 season. And then maybe in 27, when he's 22 years old, pushing 23, you might see him take a crack at the big league level. It's like that. That's a prime example of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. Bryce had almost a 1,000 OPS against righties last year. Obviously, he struggled a little bit against lefties. And the defense needs some work, but it's like if he's posting a 900 plus OPS in AA, I'm gonna lose my mind if he's got to sit down there all year. Some guys are the exceptions, just like you said. And Belt shot through the system, Kane shot through the system, Bumgarner shot through the system. Tim Lincecum really shot through the system. I mean, he pitched felt like 15 starts in the minor leagues, and they're like, yeah, this guy's too good. They brought him up. There are guys that are the exceptions, and is every guy going to be that good? No, of course not. But they just hopefully don't pigeonhole those guys in with the rest. So
yeah. And George, this is the exact thing that we're talking about.
Yeah,
it should be case by case. You know what I mean? You can't just generalize, okay, every single player is gonna get a full year in. Posey's a prime example of that. Crawford is prime example. Lincecum prime example. Kane prime example. Bryce prime example. Modern day. This is exactly what we're saying. How you can't just generalize every single player in your system and say, okay, no matter what, you're spending a year in each level. Like, it should be case by case depending on the player and the production that you're getting out of them.
Yeah. I mean, Bryce just posted like one of the greatest teenage seasons in the minors ever. Like, yeah, he just had a massive year as a teenager, but that's just not common. So, I mean, we'll see. But that was the only thing. And I do feel like I feel like they probably have an idea, and they're not going to just hold him back. But that was the only thing in the whole article that I was like, I don't really like that. But yeah, it's all good. So
I think overall the biggest takeaway is just getting back to the basics and actually, having a baseball mindset in the front office and not just looking at guys like numbers and, basing everything off of advanced analytics, and actually communicating with these guys one-on-one and seeing what type of players they are and seeing where their head's at as far as baseball IQ goes. I mean, look at a guy like, Mauricio Dubon, for example. The guy had like the worst baseball IQ I've ever seen out of a pro baseball player. It was insane how poor his baseball IQ was. And the Giants, even though they traded for him from Milwaukee, they did have him in their system for a while before he got called up. And it's just like things like that. He's a perfect example of what Winn was talking about when he said when he was a minor leaguer, he was challenged with the steal thing and learning how to steal bases. A guy like Dubon was a perfect example of somebody that needed that kind of a challenge in the minor leagues and clearly never got that and just never figured it out, how to run the bases. And honestly, you look at how their big league team's been the last few years. They have guys that have speed that don't know how to run the bases. They have guys that, don't know situationally when they should be going from first to third and when they should just be parking it at second. You see it all the time. I mean, even like a guy like Wilmer Flores, how many times have we seen him get hosed at third running first to third? It's like, what are you doing? Know the situation. There are 2 outs. A guy just hit a ball the other way. You do not have the speed to be going first to third with a guy with a cannon of an arm over in right field. You are going to get hosed. So it's just like all these little things, they add up when you are a team like the Giants who plays on the margins. You are not the Dodgers. You cannot win these shootout, 10-9 games. That is not your game. Yeah. You, especially at home, you need to win 1 and 2 run games. And that means playing smart, clean, fundamental baseball, plain and simple. Yeah. So overall, it's encouraging.
It'll be interesting to see if they have like a bunch of the young guys just running all the time now down in the minor leagues. Like I'm interested to see
Jonah Cox.
I mean, that dude already runs all the time.
I know, but I'm like, what's the challenge there? Well, Jonah, you stole what did he end up finishing with last year? It was an insane number.
I think he had like 50 to 60 because he dealt with injuries late. So he I think he didn't play the last like almost month of the year. Because for a while, it looked like he was going to post like a 70 steal season.
Because I was going to say, he's legitimately a guy like Winn was mentioning that you might need a challenge and say, hey, you need to attempt 100 stolen bags. Because he, if anybody's that guy, and that's like not even a unserious number, it's him that he needs to be challenged on that level.
Bro, that dude is the damn gazelle.
Yeah. Have you seen, there was an art, and it's funny because Ellie De La Cruz is like an example of a guy that's literally doing this at the major league level. Like, have you seen, I don't remember which YouTube channel it was, but there was a channel they were talking about Ellie, and they're like, yeah, this guy literally runs every time he gets on base. And they did the math, and it was this absurd percentage of times where he's like, yeah, we're going to remove the at bats where he gets to first, and then like the very first pitch, somebody gets out or whatever, Like he made it to where it was like when he has a legitimate opportunity to run, he literally takes off like 95% of the time.
Yeah.
So it's like he's literally doing that at the major league level, and it's crazy because I mean obviously he's super successful doing it, but this is the stuff that we want to see with some of these guys in the minors. It's like, yeah, who cares if you run into an out? Just go, like, figure it out, learn. Because Jonah Cox, like, he's a guy that he might be a 4th outfielder down the road. Like, he might be a guy that you want to be able to play all three positions. And you're like, hey, yeah, remember how Dave Roberts, we used to pull him off the bench and be like, you need to go steal a bag, i.e. the 04 NLCS game 4. Like, you're going to be that guy. Like, late in games, if we're down a run or we're tied and we're trying to, get a guy into scoring position, you might get pinch ran for where 42,000 people know you're going to run and we still want you to steal that bag.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm all for it. So, but I think that's all we really got for the win conversation. We'll jump it over to Luis Matos, who last year he was kind of my pick where I said, this guy looks like he's ready to break out. And he had that huge spring training. They put him on the roster for like 2 days. Well, they didn't technically. He wasn't on the opening day roster, but then I think it was Yaz had the paternity leave like the first weekend. So he comes up, he gets like one game of at-bats, and then they send him down to AAA. He starts off hot, then kind of hit the skids. Then he comes up, has that insane week where he had like 20 RBIs and was player of the week. And we looked like, okay, this guy's finally breaking out. And then it just didn't materialize. We saw his plate discipline, go down significantly this last season. We saw, just overall regression from his pitch selection. His contact skills were still there, like that. Nothing went away there. Like he was still putting the bat on the ball, but it just led to a lot of very poor contact. And he was very clearly trying to, hit everything over the fence in left field. So everything felt like he was trying to like yank in the air, something that we've complained about a ton. So he goes to, Venezuela. He transformed his body last season. This season feels like he's working more on approach, things like that. He goes to Venezuela. I'm going to share my screen here. Has a really great, winter league over there. Had 235 plate appearances, /300, 345, 536. So that ends up, coming out to what, 881 OPS with 10 home runs, also hit 20 doubles, 41 RBIs. The strikeout rate was right at 10%. The walk rate, now this is the one concern I think most of us have. The walk rate was only at 5% for that. It is, it's a hit, as Jeff Young mentions here, it's a hitter-friendly league. It's not the highest level of competition, but if you do follow a lot of the stuff on like Instagram and things like that, they did actually post a lot of highlights. The most encouraging thing for me was he was using the whole field again, hitting line drives, going gap to gap, hit some doubles, drove some balls hard into right center that led to doubles, not, hit line drives into right field. It was just a lot of the things that I saw him do in 2023 when he was having a ton of success, in particular at like AA and AAA. So that for me was encouraging. The walk rate is never going to be high with a guy like Luis Matos. Look around the league at guys that have elite contact skills and bat to ball skills. They don't walk a ton because they put a lot of balls in play. So you want that to be a high average guy. And, I think Luis Arias is like the highest end of this where he's, he obviously hits like 340, but his walk rate's like 3%. Like he doesn't strike out and he doesn't walk. Like that's just normal. So hopefully Matos can turn himself into a 280, 290 hitter. And if he does that, if he can get the walk rate up to like 7% or 8%, I don't think many of us would complain. Just kind of how I feel about it.
No, and it was very encouraging to see for sure. I think Matos for me is a guy that would really benefit from feeling like he has trust in him from the front office. I think he's a guy that really was hurt by the front office of the past few years, is handling of the younger players where they never felt like they could get comfortable. I mean, it's something that you've seen with Casey Schmidt as well, where they're constantly feeling like they've got to look over their shoulder and go, oh, crap, I just had a bad 3-4 games, and now I might be getting the call to go back down to Sacramento for the 5th time this year. And I think he's a guy that would benefit greatly from just knowing, hey, this front office really believes in me. They trust me, and they're going to give me a leash to where if I struggle, I'm going to stay up here for a while, and I'm going to work through those struggles because I'm ready to play at this level. And I have nothing left to prove in AAA. I think that would be huge for him, because I think you just see him where he gets in these really deep funks, and it's just a matter of him pressing honestly and kind of getting away from that plate discipline. And then you do see his strikeout numbers go up a little bit, even though he is a very good contact hitter. And you do see him, chase and, make a lot of weak contact at balls way out of the zone too, because he does have such good, bat to ball skills, kind of like a Pablo Sandoval of years past, where he gets into those funks and he's just getting out of his zone. And if he just gets within his zone, everything will simplify itself. So I think he would benefit greatly from that this year if they don't go out and get another, veteran outfielder before free agency kind of wraps up.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's something that we've been emphasizing as well. Like, if you're not going to get, another guy brought in either via trade or free agency, you got to give a guy like Luis Matos a real definite look. Because, I mean, you saw flashes of what he can do last year, clearly, and then he backed it up again in the Winter League with, basically winning Rookie of the Year there. So, yeah, it's encouraging based off of what you said, Cody. It's something you emphasize this past season as well, is getting the ball in all parts of the field, like not just focusing on just trying to rip one out over the fence. It's just looking to drive it and put it in play. And what's that saying? Put the ball in play and good things happen. And it's that basically sums up that. Yeah. See? So, yeah, it was encouraging, man. I just hope it carries over to spring and we get to see more of it this year, because you can tell he's on the verge of like legit breaking out.
Yeah. It just has felt like he has been so close. Like, he's been so close to doing it. And for whatever reason, it hasn't happened yet. I know the one thing I have seen, like on X and different things, where they're like, well, if he can't mentally handle the pressure, like, then he's not cut out for it. And it's like, there's a difference between having to deal with pressure and feeling like you can't make a mistake. And just like what Ricky said about Schmidt, like it is very clear how they've treated, and this is how Ramos was treated. Like, and what? Kudos to Ramos that he kind of said F you to them and got it together and just put a death grip on a job. But like, some of these guys, like, it's a game of failure, and you're making these guys feel like they can't fail. And that's no way to develop a good young player. Like, there's just, you can't have these guys afraid of failure in a game that you're going to fail 7 to 8 times or 7. The best players are failing like 7 times out of 10 or like 7.5 times out of 10, depending on what kind of hitter you are. It's like, that is just no way to do it. And that's where I feel like they've had him. And I think if he could, kind of like what we saw with Fitzgerald, where they put him out at short and said, you're not going to bounce around. You're going to play short every day. And I mean, yeah, he went on a run and then kind of slowed down and, whatever. But the overall production, if you just look at the big picture production, was really good. And it's like, if you just give these guys a job and then clear the way for them and just say, like, you're going to go play every day in some capacity. We might DH you occasionally. You might play, he might have to go to left or right field depending on the day. Whatever, like, if you just get him out there and say, you're going to play every day, Ramos, you're going to play every day. Maybe Yaz starts a couple games in right and you DH one of them, or you give him one day off a week, whatever the case may be. But like, just give the guy a shot, because the talent is there. The potential is there. He does a lot of things that this team does not have a lot of, with the bat to ball skills. And I still to this day feel like if he hits his ceiling, he could be an ideal number 2 hitter on this team.
For sure. He totally fits that role. Just as another contact guy, something that they've desperately needed the last few years. But ultimately, like I said, it comes down to him swinging at good pitches and making good decisions, because ultimately, if they give him a ton of run and he goes back to, those bad habits where he can't snap out of it quicker, then, his average goes down into the low 200s. And then, like you said, with him not having a high walk rate, you're looking at a guy who's on base is going to be sitting in like the 270, 280 range for a long time, and you just can't have that, especially not if the guy is like a future, top of the order type hitter.
100%. I feel like best case, like he's like a 290 hitter, and his on base will still probably only be like 330 or 340, like because his walk rate's not going to be that high. Like maybe if you can get him up, and that's kind of why I mentioned that 7 to 8% range. That way, if he's a 280 hitter, it'll still be above average. Like it'll still be like 340-ish, 330-ish. And I think league average last season was about 318. It's kind of bounced between about 316 and 320 over the last handful of years has been league average on base. So, and for a guy that doesn't slug a ton, like you kind of don't want him to be like super low on base as well. Like that's kind of the catch 22 with all this. But I don't think he's a guy that necessarily has to be an 800 plus OPS guy. Like for him to be a very valuable player, I think he's a guy that he could hit a ton of doubles, maybe pop 10 to 15 out of the park. I'd love for them to get his stolen bases up to like at least 10 to 15. I think he has plenty of speed to do that. And then just play solid defense in like left field. And if he's, got a 770 OPS, like who cares? Like with a high average like that, you're contributing to this team in a significant way.
Yeah.
So. Oh, sorry, Dan. Yeah, you're good. Just saw it. For everybody that doesn't know, Dan's been basically working 2 jobs lately, so he's he's struggling.
I'm as tired as second half Patrick Bailey right now.
That's saying something, man.
Oh, man.
All right, boys.
Take it easy, man. How you doing,
man?
Dan? Let's get this to... There we go. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's probably about it for the Matos talk. We've we've kind of said our piece. I mean, everyone here knows where we stand with him. I think we've made it pretty clear that we are still believers in him. We would really want to see him get an opportunity. We would love to see them just kind of clear the way, let him have like 300-400 at bats and be like, let's just see what happens. I mean, that I literally sent a post out on X where it's like, who cares? Just let's just see what happens. Put them out there. Let's let the cards fall how they might. And, we'll just see what happens. And if it makes it clear that like, he's not the guy going forward, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. We've got a bunch of outfielders in the system that we just drafted. We have a bunch of guys coming through. You got Kyle Tucker, who's a free agent next year. There's almost always outfielders available on the trade market in some capacity. Like if he's not the guy, it's not the end of the world, but he raises the ceiling of the team if he is the guy, so.
Well, and, with McRae sitting there too, I look at it like you can kind of do with what happened with Ahmed and Fitzgerald last year at short. You can have Matos starting basically every single day, going through, say, June, and give him, like you said, a really long run. That's plenty of time to get a ton of at-bats in and really, see like a, say, 150 at-bat sample size and see, hey, okay, he clearly needs more work. He needs to go back down to sack. I believe this is his last option year, correct?
Correct.
So you can use that to your advantage. And then you say, you know what, McRae is raking down in Sacramento, or we're giving him spot starts, on the 3rd game of a 3-game series, and he's doing really well in these short sample sizes. We're going to give him a little run. Or you just throw Matos on the bench for a little bit and kind of just mix him in here and there and kind of just let the best man win at that point, Ultimately, if you start doing this with more guys, you're going to find more guys like Ramos and Fitz. Like, it's no coincidence that these guys finally started getting really long leashes, and all of a sudden you got some pieces on your big league roster. You have to give these young guys a chance. You cannot keep blocking guys with short-term pieces that are just not lifting the ceiling of your roster.
100%. 100%. All right, what do you think, Ricky?
Yeah, we could do that at some point. We've had I see Aaron's asking too, and then we've had a couple other guys ask. I think it was the Daily. The Daily was asking that too.
Yeah. We've had a few people kind of mention it. This is definitely something we want to do. I do want to try and figure out how we're going to do this at some point. I don't want to just slap the link in there and have like people peppering calls, like filling up our studio. Like the second I put it out there, like I don't want to I would prefer not to do it that way. I may announce that we're going to do a call-in show maybe in the next couple weeks, for kind of light on action. Maybe we can do something like this here soon.
Yeah.
I'm definitely open to it. I would probably have it set up to where people need to like message me on X or something like that, and I will share the link with them that way, because I don't want to just like put it in the chat. So that way, we'll figure out a way to do this, but I definitely want to do it sooner than later. I think it'd be a fun, thing, especially once the off season's kind of, I don't want to say over, but like once we're pretty confident that the Giants probably aren't making any more moves, I think this would be a fun thing to do and just kind of get everybody's, get a pulse on Giants fans, like how they're feeling about the club.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would help too for those of you guys that want to do it. Kind of start letting us know now, like Phlox, Aaron, the Daily Blunt, all you guys, especially if it's guys that we see that are constantly commenting in here, so we know they're not just you're not a Dodger fan trying to troll or something like that. For example, I'm totally open to it, so we can actually have legitimate baseball conversations, but we don't want somebody just blowing up the channel either with nonsense. So. Yeah. Make sure you guys are commenting so we kind of know generally who you guys are first.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't need somebody hopping on and like going full frontal. So not to give anybody ideas here, but like let's try and keep it, I will have some ground rules in place, and I really don't want to have to like boot people off. So, because I think everybody here knows like that's not my style. I'd rather just let everyone say their piece and call it good. But yeah, no, for sure. It's something that we've thought about. So we'll maybe in the next couple weeks, just depends on what we've got going on.
Yeah.
But I know next week we're going to probably talk a lot about the international signings. The 15th, for those of you that don't know, January 15th, and I think everyone does by now because of the whole Roki Sasaki thing. I feel like this has brought more attention to the international signing day and all that, the signing period, more than anybody, or like more than any year recently, at least. But the 15th is when the Giants can finally, lock up some of these guys. Another kind of added nugget about this is I know a lot of people have been wanting the Giants to trade for more international money. I didn't actually realize this, but you can't actually trade for international money until that signing period actually starts. So the 15th is the first day anybody can actually trade for additional money. And then I think, Ricky, you said you can only trade for like $250K per deal, basically.
Yes. So for anybody that doesn't know this rule, Ken Rosenthal put it out there this morning or this afternoon on his podcast. So the Giants would essentially have to make like 4 separate deals for international pool money of the max amount you can do per deal just to get to 1 million in pool money. So they would have to do 4 250K deals in pool money just to get to an extra mil. So don't worry. It's not like the Dodgers can go and just say, hey, we'll give you this, BS top prospect that we don't care about, and you're just going to give us like 5 million in pool money or something crazy like that. Like, no, that's not how this works. So there are some ground rules in place. So that is good to know. One other thing, we did talk about this last week, I believe, but Sasaki is not expected to sign until the 15th or the 20th. Sorry. The 15th is the first day he can sign, but everybody's pretty much putting it out there that he will not sign until the 20th. So don't expect any bigger news for another 10 days. So,
and the Giants are expected to just go ahead and sign their guys, which is awesome. So, yeah. So what I heard basically with that, the rules with the deals is The Giants need to make 5 separate trades for trading Wilmer Flores, Mike Yastrzemski, Lamont Wade, and both the Rogers twins, and just collect like $250 international money each time.
A dream. Another nugget to keep an eye out for any of you guys that are interested in following the international market is you can pretty much expect any teams that are trading for that money to be going pretty aggressive after Sasaki, and those are probably going to identify themselves as the teams that are the front runners for him, because the way the pool money works is if they're trading for pool money, they have to use it this year. And a lot of the other top guys not named Sasaki already have commitments in place. Like we've already mentioned, Joshua Gonzalez is basically the number 2 prospect behind Roki, and he's been committed to the Giants for a long time now. The number 30 overall prospect is also basically committed to the Giants now, and these guys are expected to sign on that first day, the 15th, here in a few days. So Sasaki is definitely a unique situation, but any team you see start trading for pool money, expect them to be one of the front runners for Sasaki. Obviously, we expect the Dodgers to be there, but if you see, them or the Padres going and trading for additional money, that may be to try to lock up Sasaki. Or even if you see the Giants try to trade for additional money, because them and the Dodgers are a little bit low on funds for pool money this year. So
yeah,
should be interesting.
Yeah. And I think another kind of nugget is you might see some people try and trade for some pool money to see if, and I haven't gone through the list. I would need to see if the Dodgers or Padres have any of the like top guys kind of on their, commitments. But another kind of nugget would be if other teams may look to try and add some money, because, if Roki does demand the full bag from someone's international pool, there's going to be some guys up for grabs. And I mean, I know there's some nuggets out there that Dodgers are like reaching out to some of their guys, seeing if they can, push back till next year signing. I think that's total BS personally, like for them to try and pull that. I hope all of those guys tell them to kick rocks and then go sign with another team. And I don't even say that just as somebody that hates the Dodgers. I would honestly, if the Giants went to Hoswar Gonzalez and said, hey, actually, could you sign next year? I'd be like, I hope he tells them to shove it. Like that. No, you don't do that to these guys. Like that's just wrong. So if the Dodgers are doing that, I hope they tell them to kick rocks, and I hope they go sign elsewhere. And there are some other teams that might look at it as an opportunity with some of these guys and go, hey, if the LA tries to mess around too much, we might be able to we might be able to swoop in and get a guy. So
yeah, and the Dodgers are in a position to try to make those kind of gambles and try to get everything that they want, like the spoiled little kid they are. And ultimately, they can afford to make those gambles, but for anybody that wants the Giants to do that, it is not a good gamble to be taking for a team like the Giants, who desperately needs to add as much high-level talent into their farm system as they can. And the last thing the Giants want to, risk doing is creating bad blood down in, Venezuela, the Dominican, Puerto Rico, Cuba, all these other countries where they could possibly be recruiting more stars like this. The last thing you want is to, have trust issues with these, future young prospects that are going to come through. You want to build good relationships down there, because ultimately these kids are committing to your team far ahead of time. And if you're bailing out on deals, coaches and trainers down there are going to be telling players, just be careful with this team, because even though they're committing to you now, they do have a history of backing out of deals. So it's a very risky game to play and can really hurt your pipeline in the future. Even if these guys don't become stars, these can still be really good trade assets too down the line. So all those things come into play. So I think it would be extremely risky for the Giants to try to pull something like that off.
And I really just don't want to see the Giants like lose out on those top, especially the top 2 guys with Gonzalez and Macaris, because I know you guys I mentioned that Makaris kind of reminds me a bit of Matos, just his skill set. Just, the reputation as a super advanced hitter, bat to ball skills, all that stuff. I'm like, it just sounds kind of a little Matosy. And then, Gonzalez just being a really toolsy shortstop. Now, Gonzalez has way more tools than Luciano did. And Luciano had pretty, a lot of Luciano's calling card was power when he was coming up. So I don't want people to take this the wrong way and be like, well, what the hell have these guys done at the major league level? Like that. But Ricky and Dan, like when we were in our chat earlier, they kind of mentioned like these two could very easily be kind of like Luciano and Matos, where very high end ranked prospects coming up. And I wanted to use that example and share this because this was in 2022. Now, granted, like Marco Luciano was the number 13 prospect in baseball, and Luis Matos was the number 63. Those are two very incredibly valuable players in your system. Now, did the Giants mishandle those valuable players? I don't think that's really debatable at this point, but they were assets at that time. And
how many times did the Giants have chances to trade and have one of these guys headline a deal for, a big name pitcher or hitter at the trade deadline, and they just never followed through with it, which fine, maybe those guys still pan out, but like I said, these guys are ultimately assets. You're collecting assets here, even if they don't pan out. You need to identify these things while these guys are in the minors. And when they get a little bit higher in the ranks in the minors, you need to know when to pull the plug on guys and trade them before their value bottoms out, kind of like how it has recently, because you've seen these guys at the big league level and they really haven't done anything. So their value isn't anywhere near what it was, like Cody said, in 2022, 2023. So ultimately that's what you're doing with, Gonzalez and Makaris and guys like that. So,
kind of like we mentioned last week, the system could improve very quickly if you hit on a couple of these guys and they show some good things early, because they're not those two guys who, like we saw what Luciano and Matos did, like those two guys we just talked about, they could be really high in the rankings in just a few years potentially. And that doesn't even factor in some of the guys they already have internally that have some, quite a bit of tools. Guys like Rainer Arias, Johnny Level, Dakota Jordan, even guys like Jacob Christian and Jeremiah, some of these other toolsy players that they have. And I still think a guy like Whitman could get up into the top 100 and some of the others. So they could have some nice assets going forward, which would help this team a ton. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was really interesting when we were having that talk earlier about those two, because it's like, could the Giant, like you said, the Dodgers are positioned where if they could, they can afford to walk away with nothing. It's not ideal for them, but they can afford to take the risk and like walk away with nothing. The Giants can't. The Giants are very much in a position where if they walked away with nothing, like they just unnecessarily gave their system a huge hit in talent. So, yeah.
Also wanted to bring up, what you shared with us earlier in that, there were some scouting grades given on Gonzalez for anybody that hasn't seen this, and they gave his arm strength a 70 grade. And for anybody that doesn't know how scouting grades work, 70 is the second highest you can get. 80 is the absolute highest you can get. And that's like extremely high level talent at whatever it is, whether it's, arm strength, hit tool, speed, whatever it may be. And they gave Gonzalez a 70 grade for arm strength. And for comparison, Brandon Crawford at a much older age was given a 60 arm strength grade, and O'Neal Cruz was also given a 70 like Gonzalez. And Gonzalez is, keep in mind, 17 years old. So it's very impressive, some of the tools the kid has, and he's still growing into his body. I believe he's 5'11" right now. Could absolutely fill out and grow a little bit more and end up being, 6'1", 6'2". He's still young. Could be somebody that grows a little bit later on too. I mean, we saw Luciano, for instance, really fill out and grow into his body. He was a very long, lanky kind of shortstop, and he's really put on a lot of muscle, and so is Matos. So that's definitely something to watch, as we see him develop, assuming they do follow through with that signing on the 15th.
And 80, and for those of you wondering, like 80 grades are almost never handed out.
Yes.
Ever. Like what would be an example of an 80 grade? Like Shohei's power, or like Corbin Carroll, or like Billy Hamilton's speed. That's an 80 grade. I think Pete Crow Armstrong might have gotten an 80 grade fielding, but it might have been a 70. Like, these are so rare. So when you have a 70, you're basically being called elite in that tool. Like Luis Matos has a 70 grade hit tool because his bat to ball skills are so good. Now, will it amount to much? We'll see. But so for a guy like Gonzalez to have a 70 grade arm, I mean, that's just a freaking cannon. Didn't you say Crawford's was a 60?
Yes, Crawford's was a 60, and Crawford had a great arm.
So it's just all relative for anybody that was wondering. But if anybody has any topics they want us to cover before we go, throw them in the chat. Other than that, for those of you watching, we have like 170 people hanging out with us right now. If you do enjoy the content, please do drop a like, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, all the good stuff. We're going to keep doing our live shows every Friday night. Eventually down the road, I think we kind of have the goal to jump it to 2 a week and just kind of do the lives. And I'm going to probably start stepping away a little bit from the solo videos. We'll do more of the live shows. I am going to do the minor league updates this year, just like last year. I feel like we got a really positive, a lot of positive reaction and feedback from that. So if you guys still want me to do those, I will keep doing those every week. I do enjoy kind of running through the system, but that's kind of what's on the docket. Like it might not be right away. It might even be next year where we go to 2 lives a week, but we want to try and start getting this to more of a set schedule. That's kind of the goal.
For sure. And before we get to that real quick, I was just looking up 80 grade hit tools. The only people that have ever been given 80 grade hit tools, and obviously this is more of a recent thing, was first Vlad Guerrero Jr., 80 grade hit tool, and then Wander Franco. So those are like, obviously we know how the Franco thing has aged. Not going to get into that, but
performance-wise on the field, it was probably pretty accurate.
Those are very high-level players, so they don't just give those things out very often. So those are the only 2 guys in recent history that they've given those out to.
Yeah, for sure. Who's our next acquisition?
It's really hard to say. I mean, Cody always says it. It's extremely difficult to predict trades. We can throw trade ideas out there all day long, but we don't really know how cooperative the other sides are. There's a lot of politics within trades because some teams don't trust other teams to trade with them and give them accurate, medical history and not, do shady deals. As far as free agents go, Tanner Scott, I really don't see them going that route and paying that much money.
He wants.
Because for anybody that doesn't know Hoffman, who was on the Phillies last year, he did close some games, but he's more of like a setup guy for them. Pitched really well the last 2 years, was an all-star. He just got 11 mil over 3 years, or 11 mil per year over 3 years with the Blue Jays today. And he was actually initially offered a little bit higher dollar amount by the Orioles. I guess he was offered 3 years, $40 million by the Orioles. They backed out because of something in his physical. So then the Blue Jays came in, offered Hoffman 3 years, $33 million. And Tanner Scott is expected to get a little bit more than that. He's a little bit younger, a little bit more consistent over the last few years. But he's more of a setup guy, and I just don't see the Giants being willing to spend that much on a setup guy because, like Cody touched on earlier, you have Jordan Hicks basically making setup guy type money, and he very well might slide into a role like that later on in the year. And you still don't really have a set plan with Doval. So to me, I don't see them spending that much money on relief pitching. I don't see them spending any more money probably on starting pitching. I think they're kind of set where they are. And, maybe there's the off chance that they get Pete Alonso. I don't really see that happening. I'm still hopeful in, bringing in Santander. I think he's very affordable for the kind of production he can give you and what he would add to this team. But I think you're kind of right there. And I mean, who's the last guy? Profar? Jerkson Profar for,
I have no interest.
Left field. I'm personally not interested in that because that would be more of a short-term thing, in my opinion. But, I mean, that's pretty much where you're at unless you're getting one of these marginal vets like a Conforto-level player, I don't really see it. So, I don't know. They might surprise us, though.
I think Heath hits it here. Next acquisitions would be someone that can design better City Connect uniforms. Hey, supposedly they have a new design, and Bay Area Bob says it's pretty sweet. So we'll see. And that's Bay Area Bob, not me saying I'm Bay Area Bob.
Hey, have you seen the guy that designed our logo? The jerseys he put out there as like a City Connect jersey. It's not what they're gonna use, but he designed a Seagull Giants jersey. They're pretty sweet, but they aren't going with those. But I mean, honestly, anything that they do other than the all white with the creamsicle helmet, can't do it anymore. The worst thing was that the Giants won so many damn games when they first rolled those out that everybody thought that those were a good luck charm. And we got stuck with them 2 years too long.
They were so bad. I don't know whose bright idea it was to simulate fog on a uniform. Who thought that would look good?
Every team basically already has a white jersey. It's like, what are we doing here? So, yeah, like Grant said, I think that they should go back to like a black jersey, do like a Friday night game with the black jerseys. What I would like to see them do that they haven't done. Yeah. See, I think they should do something like that. Like when they did bring back the black jerseys, they usually did like an SF type logo just on the one side of the chest. I think they should go back with, I think it was the early 2000s, maybe like 03, 04, with the Giants across the chest. I very clearly remember Barry Bonds rocking those.
I very clearly remember Barry Bonds rocking that while in that famous at bat against Eric Gagne.
Yeah. With the big cross earrings.
Yeah. Oh, man.
That was wild, that bat.
It was like the block print Giants across.
Yeah.
I think.
See, I think that would be cool. And
outlines. Yeah.
But I think just the way most teams do City Connect, obviously it has to do something to tie with the city. So they'd have to incorporate something else in there. But from what I've heard, I don't know how people are seeing the jersey already, but I've heard that there's been a lot of positive feedback from the new jersey. So we'll see.
Yeah. I think these are kind of what you're thinking. If I can get this to... Oh my God, it's not working.
Going back to George's question, though, I mean, if you had to predict anybody, who would you think is their next move? Even if it's like not obviously like a real minor move, but like somebody who's actually going to contribute a good amount to the team this year.
I don't honestly. I don't know who I would predict to actually come in. I could make a prediction on their next move if I'm predicting them to trade someone.
Yeah,
like I could predict like Mike Yastrzemski gets moved. But man, I really struggle with who they're actually going to bring in. I would love to see them. There's some first basemen out there that I would love to see them bring in. Guys like I've mentioned Spencer Steer a bunch of times. I'd like him. We've mentioned Yandy Diaz. I'd like him. I'd even take a shot at Spencer Torkelson. I think he's got some upside. I think that'd be a nice upside pick. But I couldn't tell you who. I have no clue what kind of player they're looking for. I feel like they're almost just kind of content with what they have. And they're, I'm hopeful that they were at least going to move like a Yastrzemski or someone like that to just clear the way for a Luis Matos and just say, all right, we're going to, have some young players here. If we exceed expectations and we're competitive and we're winning games and, we get to the deadline and we're right there in it, maybe we make a move to try and get ourselves over the hump. But yeah, man, I have no clue. Maybe a bullpen guy. I'd have to dig a little bit, but there might be a pen guy out there.
I really don't think that they go and get anybody pitching wise at all. I mean, I really think, Verlander, Ray, and Webb is pretty much what you're looking at, is hoping to solidify the front half of the rotation. And I think the rest, it's like, all right, pick any two of your young guys. Somebody's got to step up and earn those roles. And then you, like I said, you still got to figure out what to do with Hicks. I really don't see Hicks spending a whole year in the rotation. So that's another guy you have to account for in the pen. But ultimately, like you said, I think Yaz is a very likely trade candidate. I don't really see him getting moved until more, around spring training. I could see them going, whoa, Matos looks like a way improved player, or McRae looks great, or they both look great. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, let's move off this guy. Let's free up a little bit of money. This could help us, come trade deadline time if we're relevant. And you get off that deal. And, Hicks is another guy. The more we talk about him, yeah, he does have a few years left on his deal, but I think if he pitches well early in the year, he could be a prime trade candidate just to open up a spot, especially if he's like unhappy. Obviously, you don't want to keep that around, but ultimately, guy's making pretty good money for not really having a clear role. I mean, 11 mil, like you said, is a steal for a starting pitcher, but until he proves that that's what he is, you're kind of paying for a high-end setup man. And if I'm going for a setup guy, I don't know that it's going to be Hicks at 11 million a year. I mean, honestly, you might be better off gambling with Doval back in the setup role and being a really high end, high leverage reliever for you.
Yeah. And George, like, I would love this roster. I would probably pick them to win around like 88, 89 games and be like right there on the edge of the playoffs, like maybe in, maybe not, depending on, because there's a lot of really good teams in the NL. So I don't know what the win total is going to take to get in. Like, I actually would not be surprised if 90 wins is the third wild card. Like, I think the NL is going to be pretty damn good. But I would think this is a pretty exciting roster. I just can't say I see them doing it, but I would absolutely love it if they can go get Santander at the very minimum. Like, that'd be awesome. Like, we've talked a bunch about how much he could do for this lineup. But I don't have a good read, like with Zaidi, you kind of had a good read on like the kinds of players. We joke with Rob in the chat, like you could always tell what kind of players was a Zaidi guy. Posey, it's really hard to find. It's hard.
I remember I called the Mark Cannon deal the day of the trade deadline last year. I literally put it out there and was like, dude, he would so go after Cannon. And then hours later, he goes and acquires him. He just got so predictable after a few years with this new regime. Like you said, I have no idea. I mean, I'm right there with George. I really like the idea of getting Tanner Scott. Because I like the idea of going almost like 2014, 2015 Royals and just shortening the game with the back end of your pen and saying, hey, Kyle, we only need 5 innings out of you. We just need you to be consistent and throw strikes. Birdsong, same thing. We only need 5 solid innings out of you. Attack the zone, throw strikes, and keep your pitch count down, and these guys stay healthy. You're going to be in every game, and then you just shut down opposing teams' lineups in the later half of games, and you give yourself this bigger window to try to come back in games, and you put a ton of pressure on these other teams to score early on you. So
100%.
I would like the move a ton. I mean, if you ask me on what I would do, I would absolutely spend as much as you can with staying under the tax if that's your goal, and don't just let that money sit there. Like, do something to improve the team, whether it's hitting or a bullpen guy. I don't see them going and doing like the Jack Flaherty route after getting Verlander. I think they look at Verlander, perfect 1 year stopgap, maybe best case scenario he comes back next year, depending how things shake out with the young guys. But you're just buying yourself time with the rotation.
For sure. Yeah. And they may, as we've said in the past, just pick a lane. That's kind of my goal. Like, I either spend or move some vets and clear the way for some young guys. Like that's my opinion. Just pick one. I don't really care which.
Yeah.
And to your point, you kind of mentioned Yaz earlier, like he could get traded in spring training or with Hicks. Injuries happen in spring training. So I don't really expect them to necessarily move these guys now, because you can hold on to them, let them compete, see what you have with the young guys, see if you feel good about some of those young guys. And then guys get hurt around the league. I mean, Giants are probably going to have some guys get injured. Other teams are going to have guys get injured. It's not a bad thing to have the depth going into spring training. And because you never know when you're going to need it. I mean, we could all want, Matos and McRae to play, and then those two could, God forbid, collide on a fly ball in spring training, and all of a sudden both of them are out 6 weeks. And you're like, all right, and now you need Yaz. So we're just going to have to kind of wait and see, but I am hopeful that, come spring training, they feel good about a couple of these young guys, and they go, all right, and they make a couple moves and ship a few guys out.
Yeah, for sure. And, like you said, same thing goes for the Giants. If, they have injuries, it could change things, and maybe they keep everybody. Or you get another team that has, I mean, we talked about how Yaz would have been a good fit to go to the Cubs before, they got Tucker. Well, what if Tucker or maybe they don't trade Suzuki? Maybe Suzuki gets hurt in spring training, and then all of a sudden they're another trade partner again all of a sudden. So things change quickly. You see it all the time. But I do think at this point they probably wait.
Yeah.
And then as far as like any other moves that the Giants could possibly make, it kind of seems like at this point we're kind of waiting on the international stuff to get done, get Sasaki out of the way, and then from there it's kind of like playing that waiting game. What happens with Alonso? I think he's the only one that really affects anything that Giants might do. I think they're kind of like, yeah, we're interested, but we're not gonna pursue you super aggressively until you kind of lower the asking price, because it's a little ridiculous, some of what he wants. There's
9 years.
Yeah, it's like there's no way the Giants are going to do that. They want nothing to do with that. I think Alonso's a guy who's going to age really poorly the last probably 4 or 5 years of a deal like that. Absolutely. You're not getting any defense out of him versus a guy like Santander. Like I've said many times, I mean, I think if you're getting him for $20 million or even $22 million a year, I think that's still a really good deal, and you can probably get him for 4 or 5 years, and that's totally fine. You could very well still have a really good DH or just left fielder on the back end of that deal, and you're not super worried about paying him that amount when the time comes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we gotta remember how much money is tied up in really a bunch of crap, if we're being honest right now. You have Yaz making like what, $9.5 million this year. I mean, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
And he's really
Taylor
not
Rogers, 12.
Giving you a ton. Taylor Rogers, 12.
Hicks, 11.
You have Hicks at 11. Yeah, you have these
Ray
guys
at 25.
Yeah, Ray's honestly the biggest one, and why you really, really, really need some production out of him this year, because you're kind of you're eating what you shouldn't have done with DeSclafani, and you're getting a better player, cool, but you ultimately need the guy to show up this year and actually fill a spot for you, because man, that's a lot of money tied up to some really, not that amazing players considering, you know, what you could get with that kind of money out on the free agent market and trade market. So not as much Ray. I mean, I still feel like there is a good amount of upside there. It's just the other guys. It's like, you know,
it's just a lot of money. That's really all it is they just have a lot of money in some of these guys.
So, you know, 22, 23 million combined for Hicks and Rogers, who, you know, both very well might not pitch any high leverage innings for you. That's a big penny. That's Santander right there. You're paying those two guys to not give you significant innings, possibly what you could be paying Santander, obviously on a little bit longer deal.
Yeah.
So
100%. So we'll see. I think Sasaki's going to be the next one to fall of the big names, unless he ends up being the guy, which I highly doubt. I hope I'm wrong, but I highly doubt. But yeah, I have no clue. I have no feel. Like I said, I have no feel with the Giants on what they might do. But I think we're at a good stopping point for tonight. We do want to try and keep these under 2 hours. Usually it's an hour and a half, but we're like, yeah, whatever. The last few times it's gone long. So appreciate everyone joining us today. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we sign it off?
No, I think we kind of touched on everything we wanted to cover tonight.
All right, sweet. Well, like I said earlier, you know, guys, catch us on Friday night. Next week, we'll do another live. If we do anything beforehand, that means the Giants actually did something. So, you know, we'll maybe, if something happens, we'll go live sooner than that. Otherwise, I'll probably put out a video or two in the meantime. And then we'll have the live Friday. Next Friday, we'll talk a lot about the international signings and, you know, kind of the list of guys. We'll go into as much detail on the scouting reports on as many guys as we can. Unfortunately, there's not tons of info out there on anyone beyond really Makaris and Gonzalez. You know, Julian Barreto is kind of hyped up by a couple publishers, and I think Baseball America has him as like a top 35-ish prospect, but I still can't find anything about him like anywhere. So, and I'm not sorry, everyone. I'm not traveling down to the Caribbean to go see these people. My YouTube salary doesn't quite pay that much. Sorry, everyone. But you know, we'll give as much info as we can and what we can find there. So appreciate you guys. Catch you next time, and go Giants.
All right, man.